What's up, booktube? It's Leah Cooper, and today we are going to be talking about all of the things that I read in April. I'm also going to do a quick recap, obviously, on my reading stats and update you on how my challenges are going for this year. So, to start with stats, let's pull out the handy dandy reading spreadsheet. April was a surprisingly good reading month for me. My reading has been kind of slow this year because, I'm like deep in the weeds with school. I'm in my last quarter and I'm taking capstone literary and creative arts. So I'm doing a lot of writing and I'm doing a lot of reading, especially in the first half of this quarter. I did a lot of like little article reading for class that was tough. But this month we read 2 books for class, and she's pretty much paused the article assignments because we're supposed to be focused on the capstone. So I was able to get a few things read this month for like my own enjoyment, and that was really nice. Like, oh, it was so nice. So I think this was the best month page-wise for me. I read a total, yes, it was. I read a total of 1,866 pages, which I know is not a lot of pages compared to like the big reading, fast reading booktubers, but I'm really proud of myself for that. I'm a slow reader. For like most of the books I read, I will do like I do like timed reading sessions because I have a lot of hard time focusing, and so actually that helps me just focus. I'll set a timer and just read for 20 to 30 minutes, and I will keep track of how many pages I read so I can kind of get an idea of how fast I'm reading that book. And like, frankly, depending on the genre, the writing style, and how much I'm liking the book, my reading speed can be as low as like 38 pages an hour to, and that's for like really dense, maybe philosophical texts or very, very densely written historical fiction. And like the high end is like maybe 60 to 65 pages, and that would be for like really speedily written, like really light written YA, but or middle grade, right? And so like that's really slow. I've watched a couple of bigger booktubers recently do like reading speed kind of challenges where like they maybe try to increase their reading speed or they track their reading speed. They all read so much faster than that. It's maybe embarrassing if I cared, but I don't. So anyway, to me, 1,800 pages in a busy month where I had school and I had assignments is pretty damn good. It's the best month I've had so far. And if you've ever felt like sometimes what you see people reading on BookTube feels a little unrealistic for you, hopefully I can stand as a beacon of a slightly more realistic reading speed. I don't know. Whenever we have to read in class, like sometimes occasionally she'll give us something to read and she'll be like, okay, go off for 15 minutes and come back and we'll discuss. I like never get through the thing because I'm so slow. And the other thing I find really fascinating is I've seen a lot of people who talk about they going to college or like going to graduate school really helped increase their reading speed, and I have had the exact opposite experience because I do feel like I was a faster reader when I was younger, and I distinctly remember a point in time in the middle of my undergrad. I was taking some women in pop culture sociology classes, and so we were reading a lot of books, pop culture, right? Specifically about women, written by women, etc. And I remember I wasn't like absorbing the details of the text the way I wanted to. Like I wanted to really like absorb it like completely and be able, because it was for school, right? I was going to need to write papers on this or something, and I distinctly remember riding on a bus because I used to get on when I lived in a different town with a really good like bus system for the college. The college sucked, but the public transportation was great. I remember I would ride on the bus sometimes, and it would do this loop around like the apartment hill. And sometimes I would just ride the loop a couple of times and either write in my notebook or I would read. And it was kind of like I think honestly it was a way to like focus my ADHD, like because I was playing a lot of World of Warcraft back in the day, and so I obviously couldn't play World of Warcraft on the bus. So if I just rode the bus, then I got some work done without distractions, right? And I distinctly remember sitting on the bus and like intentionally slowing my reading down so that I would catch everything in it and I would really fully comprehend everything I was reading, and more than that, so that I would remember it. Anyway, this is like completely irrelevant to the rest of this video. This has turned into a discussion about reading speed, unintentional, but yeah, like I've had the opposite experience, and now I think I read quite slowly, and I do think some of that is that I do tend to reread passages as I'm reading to like dwell on something I really love, or to like really make sure I'm understanding it, and sometimes I kind of will go back up and reread a page. Not that that's like really super common, I'm just saying it does happen. I do think I spend a lot of time thinking about what I'm reading as I'm reading it, and I don't know. I think I taught myself to be a slower reader, and now I'm a slow reader, and I don't know. Maybe that will resonate with someone else who's watching this. Anyway, let's actually talk about the books I read this month. So, like I said, 1,866 pages. That was across 15 things. Most of those things were very, very short articles. Oh, the other thing I did last month is I did read a couple, I think I read 3 short stories. So I read at least 2 new short stories from Strange Horizons, I think. And then I also read like 1 or 2 short stories that have been nominated for this year's short story category in the Nebula Award. So one of the things I'm going to be doing this year is I am going to be trying to read the entire shortlist for the Nebula and the Hugo for their short story category. I know that's super random and weird, but just in general, I like reading short stories. I love, especially since this year I'm trying to read more longer novels, I like kind of having a short story where if I just can't read the novel again for a day, I can just take a break and read a short story in a short period of time, like 1 or 2 sittings. And this quarter for school, my focus is on writing short stories because I don't write short stories very well, like 100%. And so I want to just read more of them. I like short stories. I really, and novellas and novelettes. I really like those shorter lengths. And I don't think I always take enough time to read them. Like I always try to read a couple of short story collections or anthologies every year, but I want to take a little bit more time to be more conscious about reading like single short stories that are maybe just like published in online magazines, that kind of thing, as they kind of come out or as they're being nominated for awards. So that's kind of like it's not a real challenge, but it's like an unofficial challenge I'm doing, and maybe I'll do like a wrap-up video talking about the short stories that were nominated in those 2 awards this year if like anyone's interested. So yeah, that's why like I read so many things but not like a huge amount of pages. For challenges, I actually read a fair amount of things that I physically owned. At least 2 of the things I owned, at least 2 of the things I read for fun came off my shelf. Another thing was a digital ARC that I owned. I didn't buy it, but it was on my Kindle. And then 2 other things were physical books I bought for class, but I do physically own them, and I did read them. My other big challenge was to read longer things, which I kind of did and didn't do this month. A couple of the things I read this month were definitely longer. But then, like I said, I also read a bunch of short stories. So 50-50 on that challenge. And then the last challenge is my 15 books to read in 2021 TBR. So I'm very behind on that TBR, mostly again because of school. I have 3 books that I have pulled out of my TBR jar from January, February, and March and April. Or March, because April I picked the book that I was going to read. I did not get to any of these this month. However, I did start reading Mossflower today, May the 4th. So I'm gonna get to it, but I didn't make any progress on that challenge. I've spent 10 minutes just waffling, I feel like, so I'm gonna drink a sip of coffee before it goes completely ice cold on me. And let's talk about the things I actually read. So in the first week and a half, it was the first 11 days of the month, I did participate in the Women Write Classic SFF Readathon. I think I finally got it right this time. This was a readathon hosted by Maya over at Maya Reads. I had a lot of fun. I did not complete my challenge in the time span of the readathon, I was trying to read one thing from 3 consecutive decades. And so I think my decades were the 80s, the 90s, and then the year 2000. Because the year 2000 was the cutoff point for the publishing date for the things. But I did read 2 of the things I set for my TBR. The first thing I read was the first short story out of Impossible Things by Connie Willis. This is Connie Willis's short story collection, and I decided to just read one short story. The first short story, which was originally published in 1988 in Asimov's science fiction, and that was a short story called The Last of the Winnebagos. This was a weird story. So in her foreword, because in this collection Connie Willis went ahead and wrote kind of like an author's note basically for each of the short stories, and she writes, science fiction is full of disasters that destroy the world as we know it by blowing it up or turning it into a wasteland of one kind or another. Oddly though, the stories almost never address the effect the end of the world would have on those survivors. They're always too busy looking for a can opener, or building a portable generator, or fending off mutants, or walking plants, or their fellow survivors to think about what they've lost. And so this story is very much a kind of character rumination on what they have lost, and it's in a very near post dystopia, like it's very soon after kind of like the dystopia moment where there's no more dogs, like like that's the cataclysm. The cataclysm is that there's something called the new PAV. What's that animal disease that dogs can get? PAV something. Anyway, and so, and it like spread, and it like wiped out all the dogs. And there's something called the Society, which is the Humane Society, basically took over the world, or at least the United States. The Humane Society seized basically social and like oversight control of the United States because of this dog disease, which actually, you know, like you could probably draw a fair few comparisons between this and like what's currently happening. And now the society is like monitoring people. There's all this stuff about freeways and like the regulation of freeways and driving, and it's about a news reporter slash photolistic journalist who's on assignment who sees a dead coyote in the road and reports it, and it dredges up all these memories of his dead dog and how his dog died. And it's kind of wild because it's just like, it's so random, but I really liked it, I think, and as a character study it was really interesting. So yeah, I can't wait to read the rest of the stories in this collection, frankly. This was weird, but it was very interesting and definitely thought-provoking and probably a lot relevant to our current reality. And then the next thing I read for the readathon was a kid's book, and that was The Boggart by Susan Cooper. I recently mentioned this in my last video where I recommended it as a backlist book for Susan Cooper. So this is a 90s book. I think it was written after the Dark is Rising sequence by Susan Cooper, and it's about some kids whose dad inherits a Scottish castle that's haunted by a boggart. The boggart gets accidentally locked up in a secretary's desk and shipped back to Toronto to their house, and then it starts haunting the kids and the kids' computer, and the little brother has a nerd gang of friends, and this is like the early 90s, and they are currently working on writing a black and white like 2D computer game, and it's a lot of fun, and it's very, very funny, and like, it's such a random little book, but if you ever see it in like a used bookstore, you want a funny read, you like kids middle grade kind of like little ghost stories, I think it's really fun. It's not scary or anything, it's just funny. Or if you have like a young reader who likes funny ghost stories, I think it's great. I think it's one of the best Susan Cooper books I've ever read. And then I did start reading Spindle's End for that challenge, but I did not complete it until May, unfortunately. So I will talk about that book in May, and I will have lots of things to say about that book in May. After that, I read a short story, and this is a recent release, I guess you could say. It was called The Center of the Universe, written by Nadia Shamas, and it was published with Strange Horizons. All of the short stories that I mentioned, except for the one in this book, obviously, I will leave links to down below because they are all available to read online for free. So this was published in the March issue of Strange Horizons. I really like this. I think this was one of like the 2 short stories I read this month that I really, really enjoyed. This was, I think, part of the Palestine issue, and it's one of those short stories where you're not entirely certain exactly what the context is, because that's not precisely the point, but it is about constructed characters in some kind of constructed reality, and how they exist for I'm going to call them the player character. This isn't necessarily a game, but I do get the sense that this is some sort of constructed reality entertainment, and the center of the universe being the player, right? And the totality of the existence of the NPCs around them hinges on them and their attention, and it's very interesting, and it's really good. 100% suggest you check it out. It's very short. It's like 2,000 words. Go read it. That's all I'll say about it. The next thing I read was a series of short essays. I had an assignment to read a bunch of articles from Narrativity, which was a 2-issue online publication put out by some university I can't remember the name of, and so I just read a bunch of them. I'll leave a link to the homepage where you can see the 2 issues. They're talking about new narrativity, like the new narrative movement, like literary movement of the 70s, we'll say. So yeah, I read a ton of those for this assignment. And then I also read a book for class, and that was called The Fire in the Tail by Giorgio Agamben. And this is a literature philosophy text. I will not say that I understood a whole ton of this. I would say I probably followed about 5 to 10%. I mean, I think it's really bad. Like, for me, it's really bad when the most comprehensible thing in a text is like the section on Foucault, because like, how? I mean, and maybe that doesn't seem unusual for someone else, but I am not a philosophy person, or like a literary philosophy studies person. I tried to take one philosophy class in college. It was on Plato's Republic, and I could not stand the philosophy douche bros in the class, and so I dropped it after like 2 or 3 weeks. And that is my only brush with philosophy. I'm much more of like a pop culture studies kind of person. Like, I've taken a lot of pop culture literature crossover kind of hybrid classes, you know, like looking at the graphic novel, looking at the intersection of film and book, looking at and history, and looking at like different film genres and their overlap with literature and stuff like that. Like, that's just like more of my academic interest. Like, I do think those are kind of 2 different diverging avenues of like literary academic study, and they each have their own vocabularies, right? They have their own vocabularies, they have their own kind of like keystone thinkers and like theories and stuff like that. And so philosophy, like true philosophy, not my thing. But this was interesting. I don't want to like recommend it though, because I do have some reservations about Giorgio Agamben himself. Like, he said some stuff about COVID that I think is questionable. Like, I'm just gonna say that. So like this past year, I feel like he's made some interesting stances. But this was like interesting. There's too much religion in this. Like 100%, there's just straight up too much religion in this, and so I can't recommend it. I didn't rate it. I did underline some stuff, but that was mostly for class. There was one interesting passage. Again, it was the Foucault section, and I'll read it to you. Foucault warns us against the modern temptation to read phrases such as care of the self or looking after oneself in an aesthetic rather than moral sense. quote, "Now you are well aware that there is a certain tradition, or rather several traditions, that dissuades us now, today, from giving any positive value to these formulations, and above all from making them the basis of morality. They sound to our ears rather like what? Like a sort of challenge and defiance, a desire for radical ethical change, a sort of moral dandyism, the assertion challenge of a fixed aesthetic and individual stage. Against these, so to speak, aestheticizing interpretations of the self, Foucault specifies shortly after that precisely, quote, "This injuncture to take care of oneself is the basis for the constitution of what have, without doubt, been the most austere, strict, and restrictive moralities known in the West." So I think that was like, that section definitely like super resonated with myself. And I did find that really interesting. It was part of the last essay kind of thing in this book. But yeah, so I read that for class. After that, I read another short story, kind of as a palate cleanser, and it was another recent release, again, published in Strange Horizons, but this was in the April issue, and it was called We Broke Nairobi by Noel Cheruto. And I didn't love this as much as the other one. And actually, this story is very much theme over character, and it really solidified for me that one of the things, especially like even in short fiction, is I do love a strong character element. I don't just love ideas. Like there's definitely like different kind of angles you can take when you like construct a short story. And so I think if you read We Broke Niobe, it is very much, there's no central characters. I don't even think there are any named characters. It is, again, it is a post-apocalyptic story where it's gotten so hot people can't go outside except for certain people who have like the right, their like pituitary gland, or I don't think it's the pituitary gland, but some gland or their pancreas or something is producing something that makes it so they can still go outside, and so they become like the feet, the messengers, the go-betweens of everyone who's stuck inside in society until they become the hunted, right? And again, it's a very short story. It's only like 3,000 words. It's got some very interesting ideas, but it didn't like connect with me on any kind of emotional level because like there's really no characters. So I think it's good, but I don't know if I'll remember it down the road much. So I think I gave it like a 3.5 star, but I do think it's good. It's worth reading, and I think it's a very good example of like I said, this dichotomy between like very idea-driven short stories, very character-driven short stories, and I definitely have a preference. And reading this really helped me kind of conceptualize some of those preferences. So yeah, I read that, and then more essays for class, and then another short story. This is one of the ones that has been shortlisted in the short story category for the Nebula, and it was published in Uncanny magazine, and it's called My Country is a Ghost by Eugenia, I'm not going to be able to pronounce her name, Triantafilio. And this is a story about immigration, and it's in a speculative world where people have ghosts that are kind of like attached to them, and it's their family, and it's about our protagonist who, when she enters into a new country, she immigrates, and I do believe she's from Greece, she's immigrating to the United States. That's the implication I got. And she's not allowed to bring her ghost with her because they didn't die in the United States, so they can't enter it. And so she becomes the ghostless. And this was really interesting. I think I gave it like 4 stars. Again, it had that character thread. It was also a little bit longer, but I don't think that's not like the thing that makes it stick, right? Yeah, it's about 16 pages. But that's like not necessarily the thing that gripped me. It was definitely like that there is this character, and I'm definitely emotionally connected to the character and what's happening to them and what they're going through, right? Like I said, all the links to these short stories will be down below. And then after that, I read another book for class, and that was The Childhood of Jesus by J.M. Coetzee. Coetzee's obviously a very well-known author, winner of the freaking Nobel Prize for Literature or whatever. I didn't like this. I mean, obviously this is not my genre, but also I just didn't like this. I do think, like, Coetzee is a very deft writer, obviously. Like, he can compose a sentence. This was a very fast read, though obviously that was mostly because it's dialogue. So this is like an allegory of many things, you could say. And like, it's a little blunt to call it an allegory of Christ, but it is. Like, I think if you're at all familiar with the gospel, you can clearly trace all of the key story points in this book and how they are analogized in this book. But fundamentally, none of that matters. The characters don't matter. The setting doesn't really matter. They're all just little paper puppet cutouts so that Coetzee can have a philosophical discussion with them. Most of this book is composed of dialogue, and the dialogue is very well written, very easy to read. I don't think he's saying anything very interesting, and some of the things he's saying are outright kind of mildly offensive. I don't know if they're intended to be. Like, it's one of those, I can't tell if you're just being a slightly misogynist old white dude or if you're trying to subvert it, because you're not coming across as someone who's subverting it. That's like a teeny tiny little point of this book, though. That's like very background. It's about a man named Simone who has sort of custody of a child called David, and they enter a new world. They're immigrants. They are scrubbed clean of their past, given new names, new birth dates, and it's kind of like a socialist utopia sort of thing, and just them going about life and eventually like fleeing the school board who's trying to make them send David to school. Anyway, it's I wouldn't waste your time. Not my thing. I gave it like 2 stars, and it only got 2 stars because, like, I can't deny Coetzee is a skilled person at writing sentences. Like, that's true. And then after that, I read another short story, which was like a palate cleanser. This was another short story that was nominated for the Nebula, also published in Uncanny Magazine. Same issue, actually. Both of the two from Uncanny Magazine were in the January-February issue. And this was called Badass Moms in the Zombie Apocalypse by Ray Carson. Ray Carson's written 2 pretty popular YA series, including Walk on Earth a Stranger, which is probably somewhere back here, and I can't see it. So I liked Walk on Earth a Stranger, so I was quite excited to read this, and I really liked this. Like, this is definitely one of the short stories I would say go out and read. It's great. It's zombie apocalypse, lesbians, one of them's giving birth. I feel like I read somewhere about how Ray Carson wanted to kind of subvert the whole, like, mothers and birth and, like, apocalypse type settings trope, but now I can't find that, so I don't know if I just invented that idea. But I thought it was really good. Like, it's not really a topic that I would usually be drawn to, but I think it was really, really well written and great. I mean, and it does what it says on the tin. Badass Moms, the Zombie Apocalypse. So go read it. I do think it was of the 2 I've read so far, it's probably my favorite, but like I said, I'm going to continue reading the list. I think there's like 5 or 6 nominees total, and I will get to the rest of them this month, hopefully. And so I finished 2 more things, both of them very near the end of the month. The first one was my audiobook, which was First Writer's Call by Kirsten Britton, I always forget. I think it's Kristen. And this was the second book in the Green Rider series. It's the sequel to Green Rider. I really loved this. Pretty long, it's like 600 pages, same narrator, picks up a couple of years after the first book. Our protagonist Kerrigan has like tried to ignore the writer's call, but she's basically being haunted by the ghost of the first writer, who's like really determined to make her join the Green Riders, and so she does join them at like the very beginning of the book, and then it fast forwards 2 years, she's a Green Rider, and they're dealing with the fallout from the wall being cracked and like the darkness in the forest beyond the wall kind of like seeping back in. It had a very interesting conclusion. It had a lot of like real subtle angst that went in an interesting direction, but I do respect Kerrigan's choices at the end of the second book regarding romance, and it was overall really good. The best thing about this book is it really expanded our understanding of the world, the universe, the history, like the prehistory before the Long War, during the Long War, which is this thing that's hinted at in the first book, but we aren't given a whole lot of details about it. We get a lot of details in this book, and I loved that. So I'm going to continue with the series. I'm listening to the third book, which I'm not loving as much as this one, because Harriet's kind of being a bitch in the third book, but I did really, really love her in the second book. So we'll see what happens. I hope she grows as a character in this third book. But yeah, I would continue to recommend the series. It's pretty damn fun, and it's got a great universe. It's like really interesting. It's kind of like it's not New England. It's more like if people had tried to colonize Scotland, but Scotland was New England, and the colonizers weren't European, they were more Imperial Romans, but like steampunk Romans, like they have magic and they have like machinery. And there's also this thread about kind of environmental devastation in this universe as a result of like the overuse of magic. But that it's still this like very interesting like thread running through it. And yeah, it's just such a fascinating world. I find it very, very interesting, and so like I want to see it continue to be developed. And then the very last thing I finished this month, as far as I can tell in my notebook, was an arc, and that was The House of Styx by Derek Kunston. I'm going to be doing a full review for this book, so I won't talk about it much here. I gave it a really solid 4 stars. I love this. This is science fiction. It's a Venus colony story, family drama, multi POV, all following different members of this one family. They're colonists on Venus, and they're kind of bumping heads with like the governing body of the colony, and I really, really loved this. So I will be doing a full review of that book. I read a lot of things, a lot of very short things, frankly. So this video is probably abhorrently long. I apologize for that, but what can you do? I don't know. I can't be succinct. I just talk too much. Anyways, hopefully something that I've mentioned here will sound interesting to you. I certainly hope you like check out some of those short stories. I'm always saying people should read more short stories, because I think it's a very different experience from reading a book, but it can be a very enriching experience. Let me know if you are currently reading any of the things I've mentioned, or you're going to pick them up, or tell me what your favorite book you read in the month of April was. I'd love to hear that. That's all I've got for you. See you later.